Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is Tom Derderian. Tom is the tree warden here in Winthrop, but more than that, Tom is an expert marathoner, the author of the definitive book on the Boston Marathon, the definitive history of the Boston Marathon. You produced a movie on the Boston Marathon. You've ran in it, what, 16 times?
Yes.
16 times. And he competed in the Olympic trials in the marathon in 72 and 76. He finished as fast as 2 hours and 19 minutes. Was a Greater Boston Track Club teammate of at least two Boston Marathon champions, Bill Rogers and Alberto Salazar. So Tom is probably the marathon man here in town for sure, and even that beyond that. Tell us, Tom, how did you get involved in the marathon so intimately?
Well, it started off by growing up in Milford, Mass, the town next to Hopkinton.
Right.
And on Patriots' Day that my parents had off, there was nothing else to do because it's too cold to go to the beach. So they brought me to the marathon. My parents say I had gone to the marathon every year of my life. I was born in March. In April, they said they brought me as a babe in arms.
Right.
I don't remember that.
You don't remember? You mentioned something in the book, though, about not enjoying it, right? At least at those age.
Well, I didn't understand what it was about.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a parade.
Right.
I got a balloon. The gun went off. I dropped the balloon. It went up in the sky. The runners ran away, and it was.
Right.
That was my child view.
Right. So you started running in high school. You started running in high school. In UMass.
And in college.
And well, tell us then, how did the Boston Marathon even come about? I mean, people know it's the Boston Marathon. It's a tradition, but it's the best known marathon in the world. Is that fair to say?
That might be true. Yes. Certainly, the best known marathon that's in the same location. The Olympic marathon might be more well known, but that's a different city every time around.
Right.
So Boston started in 1897.
1997.
When a bunch of guys from the Boston Athletic Association that was founded in Boston in 1888 by Boston upper class.
Right.
The Brahmins, they had a clubhouse, they had a cigar room, a wine cellar in the clubhouse, they had a swimming pool in the clubhouse. It's located in Boston near where the BPL is, Boston Public Library. They had, the stuffed chairs, I don't know, maybe the animal heads on the walls.
Right.
It was that kind of a beginning. Because Boston was the hub of the universe, the Athens of America. So Boston should have a marathon. They came back from Athens and they said, we're gonna start one. Where should it go? Well, the myth was that the course would.
Should we just say that you're referring to the time when the so-called modern Olympics started up again in the late 1800s. So they did a marathon in Greece, and yes, that's where they got the idea. Yes.
They wanted to copy that course, but they had to have it start where the train was.
Right.
That was Ashland. The train went out and still does.
Right.
So he took the train out and ran back to Boston.
Right. And well, maybe we get to, well, let's get, how did it then get to Hopkinton? Because it doesn't start now in Ashland.
Well, before that, let's talk about why the marathon started. The marathon was introduced into the Olympics because it symbolized the ultimate male military sacrifice.
Right.
You suffer for God and country.
Right. Right.
This was a time when that's what young men did, and every school kid knew the story of Phidippides, who ran from the plains of Marathon to Athens.
300 BC, roughly?
Something like that, yeah. I was just a kid then. I don't
know.
And said, "Rejoice, we conquer," and drop dead.
Right.
Now, that didn't really happen, but that's the condensed myth of several messengers and soldiers. But that was what young men were supposed to do.
Right.
Suffer for God and country. That's the origin of the marathon. Much has changed since then.
Right. And so in Boston, they were inspired by that start of the Olympics again, the restart of the Olympics, I suppose, and decided to bring it here. The Boston Athletic Union, that's the name of the group?
Athletic Association.
That existed for purposes other than just running a marathon?
Oh, yes, they had a golf course. They had football games. They did the whole sports club thing.
Yeah, okay. And you sort of alluded to it now, but also in the book you get into it quite a bit, which is the sort of the interplay between sort of economics and social status and social reality, really, at the time, and how that fed into the start of the Olympics, and how it to this day continues to feed into the Olympics. I realize that could be a long explanation, but to the best you can, what are you getting at there? What's important for people to know about that?
Well, in those days of the in 1900, athletics were for well-to-do people.
Okay.
People who didn't work for a living.
Right. Because work for a living at the time was plenty athletic enough.
Well, yes, and those people weren't rich. However, the marathon attracted young men who were not rich.
Okay.
These were not the ones who were members of country clubs
Right.
or had yachts.
Right.
These are now working class guys,
Right.
young guys, whose jobs, I found in my research, was often things like loading wagons.
Right.
They were farmers,
Right.
stone workers. They were laborers.
So how do we have a situation where we have a very wealthy organization, the Boston Athletic Club, but the runners were not that? How did the two come together?
Well, because the BAA put on other events.
Right.
The marathon was a small part of what they did.
Okay.
Well, it started off with 15 guys.
Right. Yeah. As opposed to about, I think we're expecting 30,000 this year.
Sure. Certainly, much has changed. The reasons for the marathon have changed, and they've gone through cycles.
Right. And how would you say is the reason for the marathon in its first years? What was the purpose of it?
In 1914, a Canadian came down to win the marathon.
Okay.
His name was Jimmy Duffy.
Okay.
He was actually born in Ireland,
Okay.
raised in Scotland, moved to Toronto when he was a child.
Right.
Grew up as a stone cutter.
Okay.
He worked with his hands. Jimmy Duffy, he was your typical jovial Irishman.
Okay.
He knew how to have a good time, had a big smile. He came to Boston. He won the marathon. He finished, he said, I want to have a cigarette, and then I want to have a beer. He was that kind of a jovial guy.
Right. And the times were nothing like the finish time. What was the first year? The finish time in the first year was what roughly?
Oh,
3+ hours, right?
yes, but it wasn't even 26 miles.
Wasn't
It
even
was
26,
24 something.
Right.
But let me continue about Jimmy Duffy and how he represents what the marathon was founded to represent. The Canadian in 1914 was drafted into the Canadian Army. The next year, when he had planned to come back to defend his title at Boston, he was in a ditch in France. His group was ordered to take a machine gun nest, a German machine gun nest at the top of a hill. 300 guys lined up. They were putting their bayonets on their rifles, and as they marched forward, one of the bayonets hit a barbed wire, made a noise. That signaled to the Germans that the army was coming.
Right.
They sent up a flare, lit up everything.
Right.
Like daylight, the machine guns opened up as Jimmy Duffy and his 300 charged up the hill, and Jimmy Duffy died in full sprint up a hill.
Right.
I mean, that typified the whole thing that the marathon was about.
Which was a sacrifice you're talking about.
Sacrifice, yes.
So
Of the 300, only 27 lived.
So
That's how brutal that war was.
World War I.
World War I,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, I think this is the same story, because you talk in the beginning of the book, of the beginning years of the marathon, an American, I think, winning the first year or two, but then a Canadian came. There was betting on a Canadians to win, and I guess what it gets into is the point that that these people. There was one group that were running the marathon, or societally group running the marathon, another societal group that was betting on it and sort of controlling it almost.
The marathon was the lottery of the day, the casino, and people put their money down, and the train followed the race along, and the bookies were taking bets on the train.
Right, on the train. Right.
It was a different world.
Right.
The roads were dirt. When it rained, there were mud.
Right.
It was dust. Cars rode on the road.
Right.
Once cars got prominent.
Right.
Kicking up dust. They didn't have pollution control. There was the stink of gasoline. It was a horror scene.
Right. And you talk about the shoes being barely there, or being certainly.
Shoes weren't as bad as we would imagine,
Yeah.
because shoes were made by shoemakers who were highly skilled and made shoes personally for people.
Okay.
Some couldn't afford them.
Right.
Some of the shoes were okay,
Right.
but they were all tried to be as thin and light as possible,
Right.
which you could get away with on a dirt road.
Right. And we also certainly have the experience now of people running in the marathon. Again, I think 30,000. So we have people in the main pack of the marathon who might struggle to finish. But back in the early days, you're talking about routinely half the field. I mean, I'm talking about a field of what, 30 or 40 runners to start? Half the field maybe. Some of the top runners wouldn't even finish. They would be too cramped up. They were someone running without any water.
Yeah, they weren't anywhere near well trained.
Yeah.
In today's standard. I mean, when I first became aware of the marathon, I was kind of, I was young and kind of a jerk, and I said, oh, I could have won that one, I could have won that one, that one. I could have won all the marathons for the first half of the whole race, easily. Yeah, well, because my world as a young man in the 70s was different than a young man in 1910.
Right.
That you have to appreciate that.
So how did we get, so I realize we're talking more than 100 years of history, but sort of what's the high points of how we got from that world of the Boston Marathon to the one we have today, where these are, I gather, top dollar athletes now who have major endorsements and are well-known celebrities, and if they're going to, I mean, they generally finish the race. I mean, they maybe have a problem that's not unheard of, but they're not sort of, it's not like a common thing for the top runners to be that much of distress. It sounds like. How do we get so professionalized? I guess.
Well, two things. The training is so much more scientific and so much more experienced.
Right.
Everyone learned from the previous runners.
Right.
That, and there's so many more of them. I detail in my book the changes in Boston's population over time, Massachusetts, and the world.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot more people in the world now than there were in 1910.
Sure. Yeah.
And a lot more marathoners, so they're better at it. Let me say how things changed. There was a guy named Peter Foley.
Okay.
Who ran the marathon. Everybody was amazed.
Roughly, we're talking when?
In 1920s. And everyone was amazed because he was over 40.
Okay.
I mean, it was a young man.
Right.
The idea was that the marathon was run at peril to your life.
Right.
And it was only young men taking a chance, young men of military age.
Right.
Now this old guy, 40-year-old guy, runs it.
Right.
And then more and more old people ran it. Then Clarence DeMar, over 40, won the marathon in 1940s.
Okay.
And in the 50s, the idea came across through Eisenhower's, Paul Dudley White's, and this Eisenhower played golf.
Okay.
It was healthy to be active.
Right.
This was new. Kennedy's physical fitness. People said, activity is okay.
Right.
You're not going to wear yourself out.
Right.
So more and more people took up running as something that they were doing for their health, with their health, instead of at risk to their health.
Well, you say that, but at the same time, that certainly in the early years, it was almost definitively done to show that you're man enough to take a risk with your life. I mean, obviously, the Greek runner, the story is he died running the race, and that was sort of, as you were talking about earlier on, something to be looked up to. So that's changed, and it's now become something that people do as a sign of health itself.
Well, the next major change was in '66, when Roberta Gibb decided she wanted to run the marathon.
Okay.
Now, in all the research I was doing, reading all the Boston newspapers in the depths of the Boston Public Library about every year's account, I expected to hear that some woman wanted to run the marathon in the 20s.
Right.
Because in the 20s, women got the vote.
Right.
Gertrude Ederle swam across the English Channel. Amelia Earhart flew across the Atlantic.
Right.
I mean, women had the right, they had the strength, they had the courage. Nobody. Through the 30s, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, no, there was nothing in the newspaper about any woman wanting to run Boston until '66, when Roberta Gibb decided to do it.
And what do you think, before you get to Roberta, what's the reason you think for why that it took that long for that to happen?
Inertia, custom, the belief that still that marathon was perilous. To a woman, their uterus would fall out if they ran.
Yeah. Were there other marathons then going on in other parts of the country where women did run, or was Boston?
No.
So Boston was fairly normal in that sense, at least.
Yes. There were girls' races.
Yes.
And during picnics and things, and then there were short races in the Olympics. In 1928, there was an 800, half-mile race for women that set women back, because women finished that race. Can you imagine this night? They finished the race and they were tired.
Yeah.
And they bent over, hands on their knees, gasping for breath.
Well, men were doing that too, right?
Of course men were doing it. But when officials saw women doing that, no, we can't let, they're going to hurt themselves.
Yeah.
We must protect our women.
Yeah, I mean, because you're talking in the early years about men literally laying down on the road and having people massage them to get them going again and that kind of thing. So
So the women weren't allowed to run a race longer than one lap around the track from 1928 to 1968.
So then that you're talking about the Olympics.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the world followed that.
Right. Sure. So then, I know from my childhood, I remember the race director who famously pulled a woman off the race. That's not the first one you're talking about, right?
That's not Bobby Gibb. Bobby Gibb just jumped in the race.
Okay.
And that was okay with the race management because she wasn't officially entered.
Okay.
A year later, Catherine Switzer decided that she would enter under the name of Kay Switzer.
Okay.
And got a number.
Okay.
And now that was set off the officials. It was against the rules.
Right. So what year did women finally get to legally run in the Boston Marathon?
By 72.
1972. It took till 1972. Okay. So why is Boston such a famous as a marathon? Is it just our imagination living here in the air that we think Boston's what it is, or is Boston objectively somehow the king of marathons, or whatever term you might want to use for it? And if so, why?
Well, it's certainly not our hubris.
Okay.
It's the race has been run continuously on essentially the same course. It started in Ashland. Then when the distance was made official, the 2 miles longer, the start was moved back. Different sponsors at the finish and different construction at the finish moved the finish line around a little bit. But essentially, it went through the same communities. Right. It was the same tradition.
So just moved a couple of miles back to Hopkinton.
Yes.
That was what, the 1920s that happened?
It moved back a ways in the early 1900s.
1900s, okay.
Then moved again and again and again.
Okay. And was this sort of a debate among, like, I think maybe you made the comparison to baseball parks where in the United States, at least, they're all different. I mean, Fenway Park famously is completely different size than every other park. Is that kind of a thing where you could sort of pick your own distance, or what's the deal with the official length of 26.2?
It was codified after the 1908 Olympics.
Okay, 1908.
To be 26 miles, 385 yards.
I see.
And then all the marathons wanted to be the same, so the times could be compared.
Which is then when Boston moved its start to Hopkinton.
Yes.
I get it.
But in Boston, unlike other sporting events, it went through people's neighborhoods.
Okay.
Where families watched, and their grandparents had watched, and their kids watched.
Right.
So that tradition kept being handed down.
So even though the size of the marathon has changed substantially, much, much bigger than it was, and other things about it changed too, the idea of people along the racetrack watching and cheering on, that's pretty much from the beginning?
Yeah, the case will be on Monday that there may be 4 generations have watched from the same sort of spot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's not the case other places.
Yeah. I know you looked, being here in Winthrop, you looked up who in Winthrop has run the race? What did you find out?
Lots of people. Okay, I knew some guy. I made a whole list. See
Back of the envelope. Okay,
and I asked on a Facebook page who from Winthrop had run, and I thought I would get about a dozen people.
Right.
And I got over 80 people.
Okay.
One of the oldest guys was John Boris.
Okay.
And then there was Gus Foley,
Okay.
who recently died.
Okay.
Then Dave Cochran died some years ago.
Right.
Bob Katz, Roy Kratman, Doug Symington, Paul Caruccio. He ran pretty well.
Is there any Boston Marathon champion from the town?
No.
No. And and what's your best time was a little over 2 hours, huh?
2 hours and 19 minutes.
Right. And so how did that stack? Do you know? I mean, was that put you in the top 100? Did your top race put you in the top 100 of finishers, or where did you kind of?
It was 18th.
You finished 18th in the Boston Marathon. Okay, that's
50 years ago.
50 years ago, yeah.
My hair was a different color then.
And there's obviously people run it at different ages. Is there anything you want to say about why you decided to stop running it in the 80s, I guess, roughly?
Well, okay, for me personally, the race was a race.
Okay.
To compete.
Right.
And when I was no longer able to train at a level
right.
That would make me competitive,
right.
It became more interesting to write about it, make a film about it,
right.
And watch it.
What do you think then? What's your feeling then about the fact that again it was 30,000 people? These are not all competitive. These are not 30,000 people who think they have a chance to win.
Let me say how things have changed.
Yeah.
Okay, we talked about the beginning and the militant origins. Well, it changed now. Now it was a healthful thing.
Okay.
Then it was a political thing with women.
Right.
And then it changed, beginning with the first charity runner, which was Stelianos Kyriakidis, the Greek.
Okay, roughly we're talking then?
In 46.
So just to explain, you're saying a charity runner, what you're referring to
He
the fact
came,
is...
He came to run the marathon to say that the Greeks who had suffered in World War II from the Nazis needed help.
Okay.
And he won the race and procured that help. Shiploads of food went to Greece.
Right.
That was the first, but it slowly changed so that now charity running at Boston is a huge thing.
So can I just explain what you're referring to? Because Boston famously is known for the fact that you have to qualify. You have to, within your age group, have to meet a certain speed requirement to run. But there's also a category of people who run who don't meet that because they're doing it for a charitable purpose. That's what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, and I gather, I think I heard there's about 20% of the runners are in that category. About 80% of them get into the race by qualifying on speed.
Right. Last year, the charity runners raised $70 million for charity.
Right.
The marathon itself brought $500 million in business to Boston.
Okay.
So this is a hugely different thing.
Yeah, no, it's a huge industry.
Origins.
Yeah, it's a huge industry, of course. But I'm still asking you the question though, with what you sort of, I mean, you've set for yourself a sort of personal ethic that you're not running anymore since you don't consider yourself to be a competitive runner. How do you feel about the fact that there's certainly a large chunk of the marathon running crowd right now is not that? Is that okay? That it's sort of a big party almost in a lot of ways.
Well, that, and it's a life affirmation, and it is a party, and it does some social good, and it's essential social good because we've closed off all these towns, and for the towns to be closed off, there has to be some public good in this.
Okay.
It's not just a business event.
Right.
It's generating something for the public, and the money that comes in from entry fees and from sponsors goes back to the towns to cover their expenses. Now the town is split in half. The fire departments in the towns have to be on one side of the road and on the other side of the road.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Sure.
And the police and so it's a big expense all along.
So I'm not sure I get it because I'm not sure I got the full answer in terms of why Boston is known. What made Boston in terms of the marathon? I mean, New York City is a much bigger city, and their marathon is certainly well known, but it's not quite thought of that. I mean, all the other U.S. cities too. What is it that makes Boston Marathon the marathon, if you will?
New York City Marathon is recent. I mean, okay, I'm not recent, but I ran the second one.
Yeah.
And I was second place in the second one.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
Excuse me. I was fourth in the second one.
Right.
So it was within my lifetime.
Sure.
The Boston Marathon is several lifetimes older than me.
So that's what it is. So when Boston started, a bunch of other cities didn't do the same thing. It wasn't until much later.
Chicago is much more recent.
Okay.
Yeah, now every major city has to have their own marathon.
Right.
But they can't have a marathon that started in 1897 because that can't do that.
Right. I understand. So just you're talking about health too, because I mean there are certainly people who look at marathoning as very healthy and good, but there's also people who say, well, that's I can't be a long distance thing because my knees will give out. There's known health issues. I don't know if you saw the research that just came out suggesting that it somehow hurts your brain, like physically, to run these long distances. We know the Jim Fix, tragically the marathon author, died of a heart attack at quite a young age. I mean, there are concerns that actually marathoning is not necessarily maybe the healthiest sort of exercise for you to be emulating. What do you say to all that?
Like Jim Fix, I knew him. He had started running late in life, and he was sort of born again as a runner. But he had been a smoker.
Right.
So he did not have that whole lifetime of good health behind him. And also there's a genetic component. So some people last longer than others. Some families have longevity in their genes.
Yeah.
And some,
but I'm not,
some don't.
so Jim's one person, but I'm just talking about more generally the idea that it's maybe there's problems with that if you're sort of looking for a sport to sort of grab onto for your lifetime. I'm just wondering if there's an argument to be made for why long distance running would be a good one.
Because it is a lot less strain on the body than things like football.
Right.
I mean, you don't have Masters football games. Basketball, jumping in there, landing down, and I mean, the strain on these start-stop sports is much greater than just going in one direction. So running is you have to be healthy in order to run. You have to have good genetics to be good at it. But everyone has some talent. And some ambition.
So it's very accessible, is what you get. Is one of the main arguments you're making for it.
Okay, you hear this. I hear this from people a lot. Probably all runners have. You run a marathon? I can't even run around the block.
Right.
Well, if you can run around the block once, you can train to run around the block twice.
Right.
The human body is very susceptible, amenable to training.
Right.
It gets better at doing endurance activities. I mean, we are natural, genetic, evolved endurance athletes.
Right.
On the other hand, we are not natural jumpers.
Right.
Well, you're not going to train to double the height that you can jump, but you can easily train to double the amount of time you can run.
Sure, I hear you. We're almost out of time, but you can't leave a discussion of the Boston Marathon without at least hearing something about the bombing and the tragedy that was there. I mean, people know, so obviously at this point, a dozen years ago what happened, but I mean, what's your sense of the effect of that day on the marathon and on the city?
Well, okay, I had worked with the director to make a film about the Boston Marathon. We started talking about this in 2007. The bombing was 2013. We were preparing to make this film, then the bombing occurred. Now, we don't want to exploit the bombing. We want to tell the history of the race. But then this thing really happened. So we had to tell that story. We had to look at all the footage of the carnage from the bombing. It was quite unpleasant to do that, to say the least. And we had only a minimum amount of that in the film, but I had to watch it all. And the bombing brought the marathon back to its origins as something to do at risk, at peril. It could be bombed at any time. There could be snipers. Nobody knew what was going to happen the next year. Our film was about the next year and all the preparations. And we had camera crews out there, and we had to instruct the camera crews, don't say you're going to shoot anything. You're going to film.
Yeah.
Don't say shoot, because there was a great deal of fear of what was going to happen.
Right.
And so that changed, and permanently. There is a huge amount of security now that never was the case before.
Right. And so is there a loss of joy in the event, you think?
No, because people have overcome that.
Yeah.
And they said, don't tell us what we can't do.
Yeah.
We're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, that sounds less like a joyful response than sort of a different kind of thing. I'm asking whether there's still has that sort of.
When it's done, there's the joy. Yes, there's a risk, and then overcoming that risk produces the joy, the release. And I think that's the essence of the marathon, that kind of release from preparing and doing a difficult thing,
Right.
and maybe suffering from it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's glorious. Maybe it's not suffering, but you've accomplished something.
Yeah.
But then it's over, and that's the relaxation. That is the triumph.
So you're looking forward to this year's edition?
Yes, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, we have much more technology, like these shoes.
Yeah.
These the shows with the carbon plate in them, and people can race much faster now with this technology.
Yeah.
They have water stops along the way. That wasn't the case in the old days.
Yeah.
And they have training, and they have much more company.
Yeah. 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 Well, Tom Derderian, thank you very much. Tom, again, is the tree warden here in Winthrop, and also, as you can hear, probably a top expert on the Boston Marathon. So thank you, Tom, for taking the time today.